Okay, welcome to Navigating Conflict, Building the Partnership with Keziah Robinson. She is a subject matter expert for us on this topic, and we're very happy to have her because, as you know, partnerships are never conflict free. So, Keziah is going to introduce you some frameworks and tools to help you deal with those types of issues. So, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Keziah Robinson.
Right. Welcome, everyone. Please, if there's anything in particular that you would like to get out of this particular webinar, please feel free to use the chat. If there's any questions, comments, anything, Teresa will be keeping an eye on it, and she'll make sure. But I'll get going. This is the second of two. So we did have a webinar last week. I will give you a quick rundown of that. But that was about the work that you do to prepare yourself for partnership if you're considering getting into a partnership. And this one is a little bit more focused on what are some of the tactics and things you can do if you are experiencing conflict and as you're kind of building your partnership with someone new. All right. See if my okay. We'll through at the end, Teresa will talk a little bit more about Boston Biz Mentors. But just a little bit of an agenda here. Okay. So we talk about partnership. Partnership is there's actually three elements, and this is the part that can be cut off, right? There's you, there's me, and then there is us. And I bring this up a lot because let's say you went into partnership with a good friend of yours, like I did. And somehow we're like, I'm the same person, you're the same person. But some of the us is not working, right? When we were friends, it was great. Now that we're not just friends, now that we're in this together, it's not working. So it can really be important, and I will kind of mind you along the way. You know, when you're dealing with a relationship, a partnership, even if you're dealing with your team, it is important to kind of try to keep in mind that third entity, the us, in order to be able to make some changes to it. Because one thing I've said this in the past is you're never going to fire your dad. So you might not have a good relationship with dad, but you're probably not going to fire him out of the business or out of life. So you're more likely to consider, hey, well, how could I work on the relationship I have with dad instead of could I try to change my dad? He's a grown man and he's probably not going to change. All right.
Hey, Kezia, I'm gonna have to
Yes.
interrupt you real quick. I am hearing personally, your sound is breaking up. I don't know if anyone else is hearing the same. If people can reply in chat and let us know, but it's coming up very broken.
Okay. I can try switching off of my headsets and going to so we can see. How how about now? How is that
That
coming through?
that is better. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Oh, we had David Bowie once again. Thanks so much for joining. All right. Uh, you guys read the slide. I think we got the gist of things. For um the second piece of the preparing you for partnership was just considering what matters to you, and the framing that I use with clients and that I use in this environment is kind of security, autonomy, and belonging. So if you want to do more work on that, please go back and listen to that one. Um, we also looked at the energy investment matrix, which was another way of thinking about how energy is invested in relationships and where it's returned, and what to do if you might find yourself in a relationship that is behaving like a vampire. Um, and then the relationship inventory. That was the main activity of the last workshop. And it was really taking a look at how am I as an individual in relationship? What has worked? What has not worked? What are the patterns that I'm recognizing around it? Okay. So that was the gist of the previous one. So I do encourage you to do that work. It's very foundational. And even if you're approaching partnership with someone else, to invite them to do this type of partnership work and relationship analysis with them as individuals and with you collaboratively. All right. So we are navigating partnership. So I like to, this is a bit of a trick question, which is, what do you need in order to navigate? This is me trying to get home from my office, right? And most of the time, people are pretty clear on the fact that you need to have a destination in mind. But I think one of the core things is we often forget to check in with where are we right now? What is our default setting? So the example that I sometimes use is like, if I am in Boston and you're in Seattle, we can agree that we are going to Chicago. We can agree that we both want aisle seats, so we can't sit, we have to sit across from each other. We can agree on all sorts of things, but we cannot be on the same plane. And often people, when they're approaching partnership, they have an issue with understanding where they're coming from, where they're going, and that manifests in an inability to pick a route that you want to share together, right? So I think if you're finding you're in a conflict with a partner and you're trying to pick the path, step one is check where are you coming from? Are you in agreement about where you're going? And then is this just travel preferences? So we're not going to talk that much about travel preferences, but that is something else to consider. And I have another workshop that I can always do around that. But the main thing here is you got to know where you are, where you're going, and then you can agree on a path. Okay. So part of this particular webinar is around normalizing conflict, right? And conflict in any relationship system is inevitable and perpetual. The statistic that I was really amazed by is from the Gottman Institute, which studies marriage. And 69% of relationship in marriage is perpetual, right? So one person drives too slow, one drives too fast. Somebody's messy, somebody's clean, right? This is it. And it's not about whether or not you're able to eliminate the conflict. It's about how you're handling the conflict. That's the most important thing, right? And sometimes people say, well, business and why would anything that I learned in from the marriage market make a difference in business? And business partnership is you are financially entwined, you are professionally entwined, your time is spent heavily with each other, and that business is your baby. So it really does very closely resemble a marriage and a co-parenting relationship. So that's why I tend to focus on the same types of things. If you're thinking, man, I did this in marriage counseling, all those tools are going to serve you in working with your partnership. Okay. So another thing that comes out of the Gottman Institute is the concept of the four horsemen, right? The four horsemen of the apocalypse in conflict. And this is an interesting one, but it is something that almost all of us are going to recognize. And I'll ask you some questions as you're going so you can reflect upon it for yourself, right? The first one here is blaming. And the idea with these horsemen is when they show up, they tend to build on each other and cycle, right? So blaming, right? It's your fault that we lost that client. Defensiveness. Now, you can imagine if blaming shows up, what's a natural segue into defensiveness, right? Meeting an attack with an attack, right? It wasn't my fault. Not me. I didn't do it. And if you have enough defensiveness, sometimes this is what comes up is contempt. Now, contempt is pretty toxic, and I think most of us have experienced being on both sides of contempt, right? But this is really when like it's not, it's not like blaming is it's your fault. Contempt is I should never have expected more from you, right? It has that nastiness to it. And if somebody's contemptuous with you or blames you a lot or is constantly getting defensive when you try to bring up a problem, you often end up in stonewalling. That's a phrase that not everyone, if English isn't your first language, this might not be something that like you use, but this is when, you stop responding to emails, right? We often see it in absenteeism, right? People who stop showing up to the job. They hide, right? They're like always in a meeting in their office with the door closed. These are all elements that can be part of stonewalling. It's when you're just trying not to engage at all. Okay. And because they cycle, they are especially dangerous, right? So I like to ask people at this point, and you can consider it, but like when you're under stress, which one of these is your favorite? I am a blamer. That is where I like to go. I will occasionally dally with the rest of these, but almost always when I am in a very stressful situation, I start looking for whose fault it is, and it is never going to be mine. Right? We all have a favorite. So some of the behaviors that can show up when we're seeing this, blaming is often like kind of a drive-by shooting, right? Like you show up, like your business partner gets to the office or gets on the Zoom and you just launch in like you've been saving it up and they're still having their coffee and trying to talk about the weather and right. So blaming is often like has that aggressiveness. And the core thing there is to keep in mind if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, you do not want to come in hot like this. Defensiveness, we've all seen. There's a lot of that can be like where somebody sort of is playing the victim. Why do you always do this to me? Right? They're making a lot of excuses. Even they agree, they say yes, but then there's a but, right? It's always got that component to it. Contempt, we all kind of know it can be hard to call out sometimes because a lot of times when people are getting called out on contempt behaviors, they'll just say it was just a joke. But there is a lot of kind of sarcasm and nasty humor, and being very hostile, and talking behind somebody's back, name calling, giving someone a nickname they don't like. These are all elements that can show up in contempt. And stonewalling is usually just the absence, right? It's like you can't get someone to respond to you. They stop, they give you the silent treatment. They say the most minimum number of things they can to get out of a conversation in a meeting. So we've all experienced all these. So if you are on the call and you want to participate, if there's one that resonates with you where you're like, this is my favorite, this is the one that I go to, feel free. It's a safe space to share. Like I said, I tend towards blaming. Um, and and acknowledging it, the big piece of this is that we all do it. So it's not about saying, I'm not going to do this in the future. It's about knowing that you might have a tendency towards it. And how do you want to handle it when it shows up? So that's the good question. So I kind of use a three-step framework, but there's a lot more. And I would, if you have any suggestions and you want to throw them in the chat or you consider them later and you want to message out to Boston Business Mentors and talk to Teresa and let us know some things that you think would be great ways to handle it. The first one is normalize, and that is why we just did that activity, right? If I do it with a team, I'll usually have you walk around and experience all four and kind of really embody what is it like to be in that space of blaming or in that space of stonewalling, right? So it's just normalizing it. Everybody has an uncharitable thought, right? Mother Teresa is had uncharitable thoughts. The Dalai Lama had uncharitable thoughts. Everybody has uncharitable thoughts, right? We're not perfect. This is who we are. So we're not trying to avoid conflict. We're not trying to marginalize the conflict. We just want to normalize it, that this is likely to happen and that these are common ways it can show up. The second piece is you want to get in the habit of recognizing it. And normally you're going to recognize it too late, right? You recognize it after you've had the fight, after you said the mean thing, after you said when the text came in or the phone call came in and you went, ugh, right? And then you go, oh, ugh, that's a stonewalling behavior, right? I don't want to respond. I don't want to engage. So usually sometimes for some of us it'll show up in the body. You'll feel it. You'll feel an escalation, a tension, a desire to put your hands up, whatever. But that's the first signal, and it's okay that it comes in a little late. We're not about avoiding any of the conflict. We're about stopping the spiral, which is where you get into a death spiral in the relationship, right? So we're not about avoiding it. So if you recognize it, even if you recognize it 2 weeks later, right? When you're cycled around a few times with you and your partner, it's okay. You want to recognize it. And the last piece is to always be curious. And a lot of this has to do with, as I mentioned in the previous workshop, we learn these things early, right? So you want to be curious about, why does this set me off? Is this something that maybe my brother did? Maybe the thing that is I'm bringing into this conversation with my business partner is something that is I'm carrying the accumulated weight of all of the annoyance I have with my older brother for how he treated me as a child. And I am attaching all of that weight onto a text from my business partner. And that's why this is getting to me, right? And being curious about the other person. Clearly, you're upset could you share with me why this upset you so much when I asked you to to clean up the office, right? Why did that trigger such an explosion? So being curious about yourself and about what you might be bringing into it and being curious about the other person and about what they might be experiencing can often help. Because sometimes we think we're, and this is one where a humor can be mistaken for contempt, right? You might have thought that giving someone a nickname was something an endearing thing because that's something that you did in your family, and they perceive that as being very negative because that's how their experience was. So you can have mixed messages too. And it's so being curious about where the conflict is coming from is very, very important. Okay. The second piece, right? So one is we're in the conflict. We recognize we're in the conflict. We've normalized it, right? And we've made a point, usually in the partnership, to be like, okay, maybe we want to stop being in this conflict. The next piece is repair, right? And repair is, what do you do when there's been a little wound, a little scratch on the relationship? Repair bids, or bids for repair, is sometimes how they're framed. This is an idea that you kind of threw something out and you're trying to say, hey, are we okay? It is not usually a full-blown apology. Sometimes people are waiting for it. It is not usually that. I'm throwing a little thing out. I'm trying to see, hey, are we cool? Most of us have experienced this. I had one where I was out with friends and on a vacation, and like, you know how it is, like it's a pressure cooker and there's this and that, and we started getting into it. And then we got to a restaurant, and all of a sudden, like, all these appetizers arrived, right? And one of the people had gone and paid for it and was like, let's just get a bunch of food. Food is a common one, food and drink, right? Like, you have a fight with your business partner and then they show up with your favorite cookies the next day. A lot of times it's something, it can be a physical affection. It can be validation, a non-apology validation, which is like, I understand why that you're upset, right? These can be things. So often these are things that I would just say we're not always like attuned to them. So you want to notice if you've noticed that there's a friction or a wound in the relationship, a scratch, like a deep scratch, right? And all of a sudden, the other person is doing something, or you have the urge to do something that seems kind of unrelated. That's usually a repair bid. And so it's not necessarily the same. Sometimes people do need an apology. Sometimes more conversation is required. But what you want to do is recognize that the repair bid has come in. Okay. And it's important to recognize, and this also comes from marriage research, because if you reject the repair bid, you go, I'm on a diet, why did you bring cookies? Right? It can really hurt the other person, right? They feel that and they may not even know that that's what they were doing. They may not even be able to articulate it. So if you receive a repair bid and you are not ready to close the conflict, to resolve it, you can say, thank you, and we still need to talk about this. You can say, I'm not ready to accept this full repair bid, but I want to acknowledge that that's what you are doing, right? And sometimes, and this is also hard for folks who come from a real stickler kind of background, a lot of times the repair bid is all the apology you're going to get. So if you really need a real apology, you got to kind of consider, do I need that for the health of the relationship? Or do maybe I need that so that I can keep score, right? You want to check why you're asking. If somebody has brought you the coffee and forward you an article and given you a pat on the back and said that they understand where you're coming from, that you're still upset about something, and been willing to talk about the conflict, but has not come in and said, I am so sorry. Do you really need the apology for the health of the relationship, or do you need it just for some internal scorekeeping? So it also sets up, when you begin to acknowledge repair bids and accept them and work with them, it also gives you a sense of what is the point of an apology and when do you need it, a formal apology or not. Okay. So now we will get to apologies, because sometimes we do need an apology and sometimes an apology is warranted and the other person deserves the apology. I think if you did the previous one, I may have put a link in there. The 5 apology languages, if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, you can go to their website for that, and they have a free assessment on the 5 apology languages. It's a little bit long, so you don't have to do it. But it comes into 5 different categories. There is expressing regret, accepting responsibility, making restitution, so offering what could I do to make it right, promising to change, I won't do that again, I won't, right? And then just sort of a general request for forgiveness, right? And being very specific about, could you possibly forgive me? And the trick that I use with people is, because most people will say, well, I want all of these when I get an apology. And I'll go, which is the one that if you didn't get it, you wouldn't feel that you got a real apology? So if they said, will you forgive me? And they said, what can I do to make this right? And they say all these things, but they didn't say something else, it wouldn't feel like an apology. And so for me, it's the I was wrong and I know why. Okay. That was something I had to learn. I was like, oh, I don't need you to promise to change. It's totally fine if you don't change, actually. Like, I don't necessarily expect that out of you, but I want you to articulate in great detail with arrows and diagrams and circles and bullet points why the thing you did hurt me, right? And how you understand why I was upset about it. And it doesn't count as apology. In my mind, in the past, I would say it doesn't count as apology if you don't give me all of that. I've had a lot of other people who say, I don't care about any of that. I just care that you won't do it again. And why it wouldn't be an apology if you didn't say, I promise not to do it again, right? So it's really important to consider. And again, if you want to use the chat and think about which one of these is the most important to you, but which one of these, if you didn't get it, it didn't feel like an apology. And keeping this in mind as you're looking at these, are you maybe realizing why an apology you tried to make didn't land? Or why maybe somebody might have apologized to you and you might have missed it because they didn't say the words in the way that you wanted them to say it. This is a really powerful tool to go through with any prospective partner because you are going to have conflict, and some of that conflict will escalate to a point of requiring apology. Much of it won't. Much of it won't ever get to that because it'll be more of a like, well, differences of opinion, and you'll be able to resolve it with the repair bids, right? But sometimes it will require an apology, and you really want to understand when you are going to make an apology, you want that apology to land. And conversely, when you are receiving an apology, you want that apology to land. So this is one that I highly suggest. I also like the 5 love languages. I think that can be a good one to go through. There's a few elements to it that are more romantic in nature. So with a business partner, you might consider it a way that how it might show up in your partnership, your professional partnership, and not quite so much how much it would show up in a romantic relationship. But I do recommend both of those, and they are free and easy to find on the web. Okay. So the next piece, I always say, we've been through the navigation, right? So we spent a lot of time with acknowledging what is, and that's what, and where are we? And that's what all of the work that we were doing on the previous one about the relationship inventory and what matters to you in terms of the autonomy, security, and belonging. Also here, the acknowledging what is, what type of conflict styles do we tend to engage in? Okay, how do we experience repair work and apology? What matters there? This is all the kind of like, where are we each coming from? The second piece we'll do in this webinar is talking about kind of aspirationally, who do we want to be, right? Let's be aligned around where we're going so that we can chart the path. Okay, so the framework that I use, this comes from organizational and relationship systems coaching and consulting, is called Designing an Alliance. And there's a bunch more questions you can throw into this, but I tend to find that there's just 3 that are necessary. The first one is, what's the vibe we're going for? What's the culture, the atmosphere that we want to create? And specifically, how would we know we had this? So this is a popcorn kind of conversation that you can have and you can use it with any type of group that you're working with. You can use it with quite large groups as well, a little bit more formalized in structure. But if you're sitting down with your business partner, prospective business partner, or current business partner, sit down and go, what's the atmosphere we want to create? What's the culture we want to have in our partnership? And then people start to supply words like often trust will come up. And I'll ask, how do you know? How would you know you had trust? How would you be able to tell that it was present? Sometimes, how would you not know? Right? How would you know you didn't have trust if that's something? So this helps with words like integrity, which means a lot of things to a lot of people. I once had a partnership come up and someone used the word common decency as something that they wanted to have as part of their culture. And I was like, well, what does common decency mean? Right. And that expanded into a fairly large conversation. And it was clear that they had different understandings. I even had a partnership come in where they had come up with value statement and they had agreed on all these values. And one of them was inclusive. And when we sat down, they had totally different definitions of inclusive. And that was leading them to not be able to make hiring decisions because one had a more traditional DEIB definition, and another had almost more of a collectivist, like inclusive means we ask everybody for their opinion, and it's a more of a communist model, right? And you can imagine it's quite hard to make a hiring decision when one of them is thinking, is this a person who I want to ask their opinion about everything all the time? The other one is saying, is this a person who's going to bring a different perspective that we would like to have included here, right? So even if you've done a whole bunch and you think we agreed on all the values on the website and everything like that, it can be really helpful to go, what do you mean by that? How will we know we had it? So this question will usually generate 3 to 5 bullet points, right? And you don't need to, I use them, hold them kind of softly, is the way I say to do it. And you can throw them in the chat if you're doing a Zoom call, if you're virtually meeting. You can write them on a sticky, like a big sticky note, or on a whiteboard in your office, and you can just kind of reflect on them whenever you're sitting down to do a team meeting, whenever you're sitting down, just take a look over and be like, hey, what are the things we agreed to that is part of the culture we want to create? The second question here is, how do we want to be together when there's conflict or friction? Do not pass go. Do not collect your $200. You must absolutely do this piece, okay? And be honest with yourself, again, about this is an aspirational document, right? We're saying that this is how we'd like to be when there's conflict. We're going to find out how we actually are. Okay. So you're holding it in that space. Here's how we'd like to be. Because I get a lot of times people go, just tell it to me straight. And it's like, has that really worked in the past? Have you really responded well to somebody when they have a conflict, just rolling up on you and telling it to you straight? Maybe. And if that's the case, great. But maybe not. And maybe you have different ways because you've gone through, you have different ways. You've gone through the 4 horsemen. You have different ways of handling conflict, right? So this is a really important one. Again, do not pass go. Do not skip this, right? You want to really make sure you take some time, but hold it lightly because until you have some conflicts, you're not really going to know how you're going to engage. So now you have a few bullet points around the culture that you want to create, the values you want to hold in your partnership. You got a bullet point or two about how you want to handle conflict. And then the last piece of this is to consider, as individuals, what can the partnership count on from you? If you imagine doing this with a team and you put the team in the middle, not what can you count on from me, it's not a point to point. It's what can that partnership, what can the thing, the thing that sits between you, what can it count on from each of you to maintain its health, to keep it solid and growing and successful? And often I will encourage people to choose something from their list that they've put in the alliance, those bullet points, and pop it into the chat, right? Or put it on a name tag. I know it sounds cheesy, but if you're walking around all day with trust the process, if that's one of the values you put on, written on your name tag, right? You're engaging and you're holding that for your company, for the team. So if you do a virtual meeting, it's really easy to change your name and add it. You don't have to hold it forever. You can rotate around. You can say, today, what am I committing to hold for the partnership? What am I committing to support the partnership in? It can be okay if both of you want to pick the same thing, right? And embrace it. But the idea is that you're in the habit of thinking of the partnership as its own entity that needs to be supported, and that you as the individuals are responsible, not just to each other, but you are responsible for the health of the partnership. This is extra important if you are going into partnership with someone you are married with, someone you are otherwise related to, someone that you are really good friends with. Because you get a bonus question, which is, how is this different, this business alliance, that partnership that we're putting together? How are the answers to these questions different than they would be in our friendship or in our marriage? A lot of times, how we handle conflict is different in a friendship than it is in a business partnership. What we want to commit to for the health of the relationship could be different. Even what we want the vibes to be like could be very different. I've had married couples and they have a very specific way, and they say, well, in our marriage, we have a certain dynamic, but in business, 50-50, we want to present as you could swap us out, right? And if you ask either of us, you're going to get the same answer from the team, which is not the way we want it to be in our marriage, right? Or not the way we want it to be in co-parenting. So it's really important, if you have layered relationships, to consider, how is this alliance different from what we might do in our personal relationship? And a lot of the reason, you'll see at the bottom, a lot of the reason to focus on this alliance is that if you scale the business out, you can keep doing this. So you can have one for you as the leaders, as the co-CEOs or CEO, president, or however you've divided that. You could have one for you as the co-leaders. You can also have one for the whole team. And point-to-point loyalty is quite hard to maintain past about 25 people, right? You start to need team spirit. It needs to be, we're all rooting for the same team. And so this activity is a way to build a central culture that belongs to the whole team, and to instill in each of the individuals the habit of believing that the health of the team is their responsibility. So everybody is committing something to the health of the team. And that way you can hold the glue together as you scale the business. And even if you have individuals who aren't super friendly with each other or super fond of each other, they can all collectively commit to this designed alliance and how they're going to handle conflict. And they can collectively commit to the team, even if they would not be two people who would likely to commit to each other. So it is a really good practice to instill in your partnership, because you can use it as you scale the business. We're coming to the end. I don't know if there are any questions or anything. We've had a few more participants jump in, so you may have missed. So if there's anything that you would like to ask about, pop it into the chat. You can also, of course, reach out to Teresa, and I have some workbook materials which can be made available to you, and this presentation can be made available as well. The next steps here is, I would just say, going through these I like a behavioral assessment like Clifton Strengths, but you can use anything. You're looking for common language with your partner. So the idea is to kind of use the same assessments to talk about your kind of where you're strong, maybe where you have some challenges, and to really position and be able to speak to each other about using the same language. Going through that relationship inventory. I think I mentioned the last one. If you're feeling like the person you're getting into business partnership with won't want to do an assessment or won't want to do a relationship inventory and share it with you, maybe consider if this is a person that you want to be in a long-term partnership with, because this is a marriage, right? You will be financially entwined with them. Your time will be spent more with them than with anyone else. So just really keeping that in mind. I also like internal family systems. You can get the audiobook. There's a lot of free resources as well. No Bad Parts is the name of the book. And that is a branch of psychology, which again helps us understand some of the stuff that we're bringing into relationships that came from our childhood, especially, and doing a personal values exercise. So if you're thinking about the alliance as about your combined values and the culture you're trying to build in your partnership can be really helpful to understand what your personal values are and which of those might have to be integrated in a different way, right? Because you may have some personal values which your partner doesn't share, and you want to have that conversation about how do we bring this together so that we're building a culture that is not in conflict with either of our personal values. And then getting to know each other, right? And so going through the partnership alliance, um, going through a mission and vision process, and figuring out how to integrate your personal values into your so that they are not in conflict with each other or with the partnership and the business as all. So that is it for me. Thank you so much for joining. I know Teresa's going to talk a little bit more about Boston Business Mentors.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Kezia. That was just fantastic information. Don't forget, Boston Business Mentors is here for you in many different ways. We want to make sure you have the tools you need to be successful with your business. We're here for mentorship. You can see the QR code there on the screen to get yourself a mentor. A mentor can be a sounding board. They can be somebody that helps you plan for a goal. They can help you be somebody that helps you find resources for things that you're finding challenging with your business. Our workshops and webinars, we are going through the summer. There'll be a few less, but we do have a great new offerings through the summer. But we have all the recordings on the website as well. They're covering so many topics. So look for those. And of course, the general information through blogs and through template downloads and different resources on the website. So always think of us when you're trying to find information for your small business. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Kezia, for participating in this webinar. And we hope to see you all again real soon.